Hey everyone, Whoopley here. So there's been a lot of talk recently in regards to the Epic Games Store, and specifically, how it's been claiming more and more games as exclusive titles on the PC market. I've heard arguments from both sides of whether this is good or bad for consumers and the games industry, but I think a lot of the arguments confuse some of the details, so I really wanted to sit down and talk about my take on the situation in as detailed and structured a way as possible. To those of you who know me, it shouldn't come as a surprise that I'm not a fan of the Epic Games Store's current strategy. To find out why, let's get into it. Alright, so let's start by breaking this down in more detail. The basic issue at hand is that Epic Games is working with developers to create deals that lead certain games to be entirely exclusive for purchase via the Epic Games Store, for either a limited or unlimited duration on PC. In some cases, these games are also available for consoles, but are locked out of other common major PC stores like Steam or GOG. Now, this has caused some backlash from the PC gaming community because the immediate consequences of this are that consumers are unable to purchase games on PC they may have otherwise been interested in, unless, of course, they buy it from the Epic Games Store. And this is the fundamental problem of exclusivity. It inherently limits consumer choice and agency in the market. When consumers have less choice of where to purchase a product, they are forced to abide by the current exclusive owner if they'd like to legally acquire the product. This is problematic because it basically means that whatever the current store's policies and limitations are, every consumer must abide by them if they want to buy the game. This can lead to issues such as a store not being available in certain countries, not allowing some countries' forms of currency, or not adjusting the price correctly for them, concerns over information privacy with the platform, or something as simple as the store not having a fair refund policy. Whatever the concerns or issues that exist with the platform, it doesn't really matter. The consumer has no agency to vote with their wallet if they want to play the game but aren't satisfied with the platform it's being sold on. The obvious out here is that if they are truly unhappy, they can just choose not to buy the game until the limited exclusivity window ends, or just never buy the game if it's an indefinite window. To be honest though, that's a pretty lousy choice for consumers, especially if they like the product and developer and their issues are specifically with the platform it's being sold on. One way to help illustrate why exclusivity is so problematic is to look at a common existing practice: console exclusivity. It's actually pretty interesting to see so much community backlash in regards to the Epic Games Store and its limitations of choice for PC gamers, because many people already accept the common practice of titles being exclusive to some consoles only. All we have to do to help understand this issue is to look at someone who doesn't own a certain console. Want to play God of War but don't own a $400 PlayStation? Well, too bad. You can't play that game at all, even if you own a PC, Xbox, or Switch. Same thing goes for the many existing exclusives across all the major consoles. This is inherently anti-consumer, as it creates large barriers to entry in order to experience great video games. In the most consumer-friendly world, every game would be available on all platforms, all the time. Unfortunately, that's just not how the world works. Console exclusives exist because the companies that own the platforms want to maximize the money they make off of the games on their system, as well as sell as many systems as they possibly can. In some cases, this can actually be a really good thing, both for consumers and developers. In instances where platform companies fund the development of a game in exchange for exclusivity, I actually think this ends up benefiting everyone. Using this method, video games that likely wouldn't have been otherwise made get a chance to exist. To me, this represents the good that exclusives can actually achieve when done mindfully. However, the inner cynic in me feels like this usually isn't the case. In instances where third-party developers are making games and choose to take deals to sell the exclusive rights to a platform for distribution, this can easily feel like a cash grab that ends up hurting the consumer, even if it does help the developer through extra income. This is actually where I think the Epic Games Store debate gets interesting though. People in favor of the Epic Games Store exclusivity deals have been quick to point out the amount of money that developers are getting from these deals. Money that can be reinvested in future games development or DLC is potentially a huge boon to the gaming industry and the developers involved in these deals. To this I say they are technically not wrong. In theory, helping create more opportunities for developers to find some level of guaranteed success will ultimately benefit everyone in the long term, as that studio will be able to make more games that may not have otherwise seen the light of day. That being said, this happens at the cost of the lack of consumer choice and agency. In my ideal situation as a consumer, I like to be able to help support developers in the best way I see fit through my actions and decisions. My ultimate problem with the Epic Games Store exclusivity deals, and why I'm against them, is that at the end of the day, these exclusivity deals rob me of that agency. Now, that being said, many people have actually cited that one of the major downsides of Steam is that they take a huge cut of the total sales on their platform, which limits the success of developers. On top of this, one of the main benefits that developers have cited in distributing on the Epic Games Store is that it takes a much smaller cut than Steam in its sales. That distinction between platforms is actually really great. The problem lies in execution. As a consumer, if one of my priorities is to help support my favorite developers, I should be able to choose to go with a platform that helps them the most. That's what consumer agency is all about, and why the Epic Games Store can actually prove to be a pretty awesome addition to the platform market. However, as should be pretty obvious by now, that's just not the case here. By forcing the consumers through exclusivity, consumer choice is stripped away. From an optics perspective, it definitely feels more like the developers making the decision to partner with Epic Games come off as greedy. If developers listed their games on both Steam and the Epic Games Store, and then made a press release or a tweet asking for fans to buy it on the Epic Games Store if fans wanted to help support them more, perfect. That's just how it should work. Consumers would be empowered to make their own personal choice based on their priorities and preferences without worrying about weird platform limitations that may exist. Alas, that's not the reality we live in when it comes to the Epic Games Store. To take a step back for a moment, another argument I've heard from people is that while this does hurt consumer agency in the short term, it's ultimately better long term because of the lack of competition in the digital marketplace space right now. I just don't agree with this, so let me try to explain why. At the macro level, monopolies are bad because they also limit consumer choice. In a world where everyone and their mother uses Steam, Valve isn't really incentivized to improve their platform at all. If consumers dislike a policy Steam implements, Valve can just say, "So what? What are you going to do about it?" Because they know there are no major competitors for consumers to turn to. To me, this is the implicit assumption on why increased competition is good. If there are 3 major companies in a market, each one has to find creative ways to continually attract more customers by offering the best service possible or by finding niches that they can specialize in to provide tailored experiences to specific audiences. Thus, the argument as I see it is that when people say that while the Epic Games Store exclusives may be bad in the short term because it limits consumer choices of where to buy certain games, it'll also ultimately benefit consumers long term because it's creating more competition to Steam. As such, consumers will ultimately benefit from the additional pressure on Steam to keep improving their platform and provide customers with another option if Valve decides to make decisions that anger their customers. To me, this only works in theory, and in reality is not a good trade-off in this situation. Right now, many AAA companies already have their own launchers that they use to provide alternatives to Steam. Many of these have already found ways to innovate the platform, such as Uplay's achievements that have tangible cross-game rewards or Origin's generous return policy. While these usually contain games that are made exclusively by the company, Ubisoft and EA respectively, it still creates more options for consumers as alternatives to Steam. Additionally, and in my mind the best Steam alternative, GOG contains a multitude of games across companies and developers, with a focus of no DRM and making old-school games available on modern devices. GOG is how competition in the market should work. They are creating an alternative experience focused on building consumer goodwill and finding niches to provide unique features. Epic Games, on the other hand, is trying to force the hand of the market by creating competition via scarcity. In other words, false competition. This competition is just fake. They're creating the problems and then solving it themselves through their platform, which doesn't serve to add anything to the market space at all. The main counterargument I've heard from doing it the nice way is that companies simply don't have the capital to continually develop and build a reliable user base in order to grow the platform they're working on. I think this counterargument fails for 2 main reasons. One that's particularly specific to this situation. My main counterargument against this is that by forcing people onto your platform, you're not actually building a long-term user base. I think the assumption often made here is that if Epic Games forces people to sign up and use their platform via exclusives initially, once they have enough of a user base, they'll stop using exclusives because they'll be off the ground and be able to offer additional features that have been built. I think this is a faulty assumption, though. Perhaps it's just me overestimating how savvy consumers are, but I'm willing to bet that if a company uses tactics that generate bad consumer will, and then thinks those consumers will stick around long term once they're not forced to, I'll be dead wrong. My guess is that consumers instead will jump ship as soon as possible. After all, why would they have a reason to stay? The features Epic will be building now have to outweigh the mountain of negative consumer sentiment they've now also built. In Valve's case, people argue that's how they created their monopoly. Change of version keeps people to the platform they've stayed most loyal to, after all. While I do agree, Valve built their platform as a huge first-time opportunity that unlocked entirely new potentials for many consumers, and built a reliable platform that people enjoyed using from the get-go. As such, people still have a lot of consumer goodwill towards Valve and to their platform to this very day. I think there's an argument to be made around new user acquisition to people who have never used Steam before, specifically in regards to the younger gamers that Fortnite is bringing into the ecosystem. But I also believe that given the limited offerings of the Epic Games Store, even those kids still have Steam. Epic Games is trying to target Steam users who are hardcore PC gamers too. Metro Exodus and Borderlands 3 both have loyal PC fanbases from the games in the series that are 10 plus years old. I just don't believe that those same experienced gamers will choose to continue to use the Epic Games Store and they're no longer forced to. The second counter argument I'd make is in regards to needing to create a baseline user base for income reasons in order to develop the necessary platform features. To be blunt, Epic Games is gonna be one of the most wealthy video game companies in the world right now. They've made billions off of Fortnite, so I don't believe for a second they need the money they're making via exclusives on the Epic Games Store. Because of their specific situation, I have to believe their goal is mainly generating a user base. But as I mentioned, I actually think that really only benefits them in the short term. While that does help developers too, it's just not worth it for consumers in the way it's being done. So that's my take on the Epic Games Store controversy. I don't think I really said anything new or eye-opening, but hoping that by breaking down some of the major arguments, I've helped illustrate why it ultimately hurts the ecosystem on the whole. It's bad for consumers short term with questionable long-term benefits because people will jump ship from the platform and still choose to use Steam once they get their agency back. It's good for developers, but it's done in a way that hurts consumers while a pro-consumer and pro-developer alternative exists. And it's really, really good for Epic Games. Yay! Hey everyone, so if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. This was my first video ever, so I really appreciate you taking the time to check it out. And let me know if you want more. I have a few other ideas for video topics in my head, so if you like what you've seen, then just let me know. Hopefully you enjoyed it. All right, thanks guys.